Imagine a world where your daily wake-up call came not from an alarm clock, but from a knocker-up tapping on your window with a long stick, or a time when your barber might also offer to pull out your teeth. These aren't fantasy stories, but glimpses into bizarre jobs from history that were very real. Stick around to hear these incredible tales.
In the foggy mornings of Victorian England, a figure with a long stick would tap gently at your bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. This was the knocker-up, a real job. Someone paid to wake you before dawn so you could get to the mill, the factory, or the docks on time. They'd memorize your routine. 5:30 a.m. on weekdays, maybe 6:15 on Sundays. Some used rattles, some used pea shooters to tap higher windows. Imagine trying to fall back asleep with someone pointing a bamboo rod at your window every morning. You might grow fond of them, or slightly annoyed. Whole neighborhoods depended on these early risers, often elderly women or retired watchmen, wandering silent cobbled streets before the world stirred. The role wasn't regulated, just trust and timing. And no one ever really asked, who woke the knocker up? Now, take a breath. Picture that quiet street, a rising fog, and the delicate sound of someone gently tapping glass. Isn't it funny how, before technology, we turned to each other for the simplest miracles, like waking up?
In Tudor England, someone had to handle the waste, human waste. Enter the gong farmer, a job as necessary as it was revolting. Gong farmers worked by night, descending into cesspits beneath castles and cities to shovel out what no one else dared touch. Gong meant dung. And if you were a gong farmer, your job wasn't just to scoop, it was to navigate labyrinthine sewers, carry barrels of filth to carts, and dispose of it outside city walls. You were paid well, but forbidden to live within city limits. The stench stayed on your skin, clothes, soul maybe. Still, imagine the silent hours down there. Lanterns swinging gently, rats scuttling nearby, echoes of dripping stone. The city never saw you, but it needed you. You kept the kingdom clean. Oddly enough, some took pride in it. The job had rules, uniforms, regulations. So tonight, as you drift to sleep, remember the humble heroes of sanitation. Without them, history would be a lot messier. In 17th century Wales and rural England, families believed sins could linger after death. So they hired a sin eater, a solitary man, usually outcast or poor, who sat beside the deceased, consumed bread and ale placed on the chest of the corpse, and took on their sins. He ate their guilt, their secrets, their regrets. It was symbolic, but deeply real to the grieving. The ritual passed spiritual burdens onto someone else, freeing the soul for the afterlife. The sin eater, meanwhile, was shunned, seen as spiritually toxic, paid in coins and scraps. No one wanted to speak with him afterward. But can you imagine? Sitting quietly in a candlelit room, beside someone who had just passed, chewing slowly, knowing your presence brought comfort? He took on shadows so others could rest in peace. Tonight, as your breath softens and your thoughts quiet, spare a moment for the ones who swallowed grief for others. Sometimes the most forgotten were also the most needed. Meet the whipping boy. In certain monarchies, a young prince couldn't be struck. Too sacred, too divine. So another boy, raised beside him, was beaten in his place. Every time the prince misbehaved, the whipping boy suffered the consequences. But here's the twist. These boys often became best friends. Imagine the heartbreak. You mispronounce Latin, and your companion winces under a tutor's cane. You skip a lesson, and he cries while you watch. And yet, in this strange courtly bond, the whipping boy gained influence. His pain shaped princes. Over time, some whipping boys even advised future kings. Their scars became their voice. And as strange as it sounds, this job was real, documented, institutionalized. Because royalty, you see, had to remain untouched, even in childhood. Now close your eyes and think of the quiet loyalty between two children in velvet halls. History can be painful, but it's never without its strange forms of love. Now picture a shovel, a cold night, and a body freshly buried. In the 18th and 19th centuries, doctors needed cadavers to study anatomy, but the law limited how many they could legally obtain. So, they turned to resurrectionists, body snatchers who stole corpses from graves. It sounds gruesome, but it was a paid job. Teams would wait until nightfall, dig swiftly, pull the body out, and sell it to medical schools. Payment was high. Risks were higher. These weren't monsters, just desperate men caught in the odd space between death and science. They used silence as a tool. No loud digging, no lanterns, just soft soil and stolen time. Eventually, laws changed. Medical schools got legal donations. But for a strange moment in history, knowledge came on the backs of grave robbers. Tonight, let your mind rest on that paradox, stealing the dead to save the living. And what would you do if knowledge needed a crime? In the 18th and 19th centuries, bloodletting was considered a cure-all, and leeches were the stars of this remedy. But before they reached doctors' jars, someone had to find them. Enter the leech collector. Usually women, often barefoot, they would wade into muddy waters and let leeches attach to their skin. One by one, they'd drop them into jars. Imagine the cold bite, the squirming, the quiet patience of waiting for parasites to do their job. Sometimes they used horses or sick animals to bait larger quantities. But often, it was just a person standing in silence feeding their blood to a medical market. It was slow, painful, and oddly poetic. So next time you hear about old medical practices, think of the marsh, the gentle splash of water, the silent woman who made healing possible by offering her own blood. And now rest easy. Some jobs were more noble than they appeared. Before modern clocks, Japanese towns used 2 time systems. Day and night were divided into 6 hours each, but the lengths shifted with seasons. So someone had to keep track. Enter the Yagura Daiko. These were drummers stationed in watchtowers who struck massive drums to announce the changing hours. Their beats told you when to open your shop, light your lantern, say your prayers, or rest. Imagine a booming drum beat rolling over wooden rooftops, a monk's pace, a samurai's posture. These human clocks had to master rhythm, tradition, and astronomical observation. The world ticked because they did. In a way, their job was music and timekeeping, woven into public life. So as you lie in bed, think of those tower drummers, alone, high above the town, holding the beat of daily life. Time kept by the echo of wood on leather. Sleep well to that rhythm. Plague doctors' assistants weren't licensed healers. They were often local volunteers. Criminals offered pardons, or impoverished villagers. Their task? Clean the dead, carry bodies, hold down patients, burn the linens. They wore no grand masks, sometimes no protection at all. Yet without them, the doctor couldn't do his work. The cities would have drowned in disease. They lit fires of herbs in the streets, drove carts full of the dead, whispered last words, and they vanished from history. So tonight, think of the ones behind the front lines, the ones without names, pay, or praise, the quiet helpers who touched the world's suffering and asked for nothing in return. A crowd gathers around a brightly dressed man with a belt full of pliers. He is the tooth drawer, an entertainer and self-styled dentist. He shouts, sings, dances, and then yanks out teeth, often painfully, sometimes dramatically. Tooth drawers weren't trained. They traveled from town to town, pulling rotten molars and hawking miracle elixirs. It was part performance, part horror show. The pain was real, but so was the relief. For those in agony, the drawer was salvation. Can you imagine the noise? The clash of cymbals, the hum of gossip, and then, snap, a molar freed. In this strange blend of medicine and theater, the tooth drawer thrived. And now, as you drift off, smile gently. Even history's oddest jobs had their moments of bite. But it's not powered by gears or men. It's powered by a dog. The turnspit dog ran inside a wheel like a hamster, turning the spit for hours. Bred for endurance, not beauty, these dogs lived hard lives. Kitchens were hot, wheels unforgiving. They rested only when the meat was done. To motivate them, some cooks threw hot coals behind the wheel. But despite their hard role, turnspit dogs became household companions. Queen Victoria even kept one as a pet. Eventually, technology replaced them, and the breed vanished. Tonight, let your heart soften for a dog who ran so others could feast. Even in small paws, history turns forward. Hey friends, take a deep breath and imagine the creak of a ship in stormy waters. You are aboard a British naval vessel, 18th century. Cannons line the deck, gunpowder fills the air, and in the middle of it all, small boys sprinting barefoot. These were powder monkeys, young lads, often just 10 or 12 years old, tasked with running gunpowder from the ship's hold to the cannons above. They had to be fast, nimble, and silent. Each time the ship rocked, they balanced trays of powder like trays of fire. One stumble could be deadly. But they kept moving, running through smoke and orders. Their job? Keep the cannons fed. Despite the danger, some powder monkeys grew into seasoned sailors. Others were never remembered. Now picture the wind in your hair, sails snapping above, and the heartbeat of a boy keeping time with war. Sleep gently tonight. Even the smallest feet made history move. You're standing beside the murky River Thames now, fog clinging to your coat. The tide is low, and something glimmers beneath the mud. In 19th century London, mudlarks were scavengers, often children, who searched the riverbanks for anything they could sell: buttons, nails, coins, bones, whatever the Thames gave up. It was cold, filthy, dangerous, but it was survival. They learned to read the river like a story, which spots collected treasures, when tides turned cruel, how to dodge inspectors. And sometimes they found history: Roman coins, medieval daggers, trinkets from long-lost ships. Mudlarking was a strange blend of archaeology and poverty. But for those with sharp eyes and patience, the river whispered secrets. So tonight, let the current of this memory drift softly by. Sometimes treasure lies in the mud, and in the ones who dared to look. Dear listener, you're strolling through a cobblestone alley now. London, early 20th century. A voice calls out softly, "Meat for your moggy." The cat meat man sold scraps, often horse flesh, to feed the city's cats. With a pushcart and small skewers, he walked his route calling familiar felines by name. It was a niche job, born from the needs of the poor and the loyalty of pets. For a few pennies, you could keep your cat happy, even if you couldn't afford your own meal. And the cats? They came running, over fences, down rooftops, tails high in the air. Some meat men even kept ledgers, tallies of who owed what, which cats were fussy, who liked liver best. The job faded with refrigeration and packaged pet food. But for a brief, strange moment, a man and his meat cart were a cat's favorite visitor. Close your eyes and picture that gentle parade. A man, a cart, and a chorus of purring gratitude. Hey friends, dim the lights, because once someone else had to light them for you. Before electricity, every evening in cities like Paris or Boston, a figure would walk the streets with a long pole. He was the lamplighter. His task? Ignite every gas lamp before dusk, and return at dawn to snuff them out. He carried a ladder, a torch, and a memory of which lamps flickered stubbornly. The job wasn't just about fire, it was about rhythm, precision, keeping the night at bay. Some lamplighters grew attached to their roots. They'd hum tunes as they worked, nod to shopkeepers, smile at children watching from windows. And when streetlights were automated, these men faded into history, like a flame gently blown out. Now, as your room darkens and silence wraps around you, think of the man who walked before the stars did, lighting paths for strangers he'd never meet. You are seated in a wooden chair now. A bright red pole spins outside, and your doctor holds a razor. In medieval Europe, barbers didn't just cut hair. They performed surgeries, pulled teeth, even conducted bloodletting. They were called barber surgeons. The iconic red and white barber pole? It represents blood and bandages. Their tools weren't sterile. Their cures were rudimentary. But they were essential, especially for soldiers, travelers, or those too poor for physicians. Inside these tiny shops, you'd hear gossip, see jars of leeches, and maybe witness someone lose a molar mid-shave. It was chaotic, but comforting too, a neighborhood hub of health and hair. So next time you sit for a trim, remember the blade once carried far more responsibility. Rest easy now. Your barber likely won't ask to bleed you tonight. Dear listener, imagine scratching your head and someone arriving with a solution both personal and peculiar. In crowded 17th century households where lice were common, louse catchers roamed, sometimes family members, sometimes paid helpers. Their tools? Fingernails, candles, knitted combs. They'd part your hair gently, inspect your collar, and squash the tiny invaders between thumbnails or pop them into candle flames. It was intimate, slightly gross, and oddly bonding. In some cultures, mothers and daughters did it while telling stories. Lovers even saw it as a tender act. And in army barracks, it was survival. The job faded as hygiene improved, but it left behind a strange shared memory of closeness. So as you drift off, think of the quiet comfort in having someone care for your smallest discomforts. Even pests brought people together. Hey friends, breathe deeply. You're in the great halls of England's royal palaces now, and the air smells of roses, lavender, and mint. That's thanks to the herb strewer. From the 17th century onward, this was a real role at court. A woman would scatter fragrant herbs across floors and corridors to mask odors and uplift the soul. She chose herbs seasonally, some for calm, others for warding illness, many just for joy. When Queen Elizabeth I entered a room, petals danced beneath her feet. The herb strewer made every arrival an event. It wasn't just about smell, it was ritual, beauty, a sensory spell cast with each step. Eventually, the position vanished, but the idea lingered in potpourri, perfumed sachets, and floral aisle runners at weddings. So tonight, let your breath fill with imagined lavender. Some jobs were poetry in motion. You're walking through a sleepy village square. A bell rings once, twice, and a voice begins to call. He is the crier of the dead. His job? Announce those who passed away. Before newspapers, communities needed a way to share loss. So a man with a bell and a solemn voice walked from door to door or stood in public squares, reading the names of the newly departed. He gave death a voice and comfort too. Some added poems. Others shared the deceased's favorite hymn or final words. It was gentle, public, reverent. Now, as you listen to the hush around you, let your heart rest with the thought that even endings had announcers. Not all messengers carried news of birth. Dear listener, your hands are cold. You strike a tiny match, and in its glow you see her. In Victorian London, match girls worked in factories, dipping wooden sticks into phosphorus. Their fingers turned yellow. Their teeth rotted. The job was called dangerous, but it was often the only work poor girls could find. Their pay was low, hours long, and phosphorus poisoning, called phossy jaw, was a common fate. Yet they sang, marched, even organized one of the first industrial strikes in Britain. These girls lit the way and paid dearly for it. So tonight, let a small flame flicker in your mind. Some lights come from the bravest hearts. Hey friends, we're back in Edo-era Japan. It's quiet. Lanterns glow softly, and someone is hauling buckets through the alleyways. The night soil woman collected human waste from household toilets, often before sunrise. Her load was precious, sold to farmers as fertilizer. In Japan's closed-loop systems, nothing was wasted. Even what we flush away had value. These women memorized routes, navigated narrow lanes, balanced heavy sloshing pails in silence. It wasn't shameful. It was respected. A necessary part of urban life. Clean, efficient, even graceful. Now as you lie still, consider the strange beauty of systems where every job, no matter how messy, helped things grow. And tomorrow may you find worth in even the smallest tasks. Hey friends, if you love this series, don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more strange and beautiful jobs ahead. You are tiptoeing through a medieval city now. Lanterns flicker. Something scurries in the corner of your eye. In the days when disease was blamed on bad air, rats ran free through homes, barns, and ships. Enter the rat catcher. Armed with dogs, traps, and sometimes just a stick, he roamed alleys and crawl spaces, hunting rodents, one whisker at a time. He often worked alone, knew every burrow and beam, his nose trained to sniff droppings and rot. Some carried live cages to display their catch, an odd form of advertisement. Others were said to whisper charms, calming rats into submission. True or not, they were the closest thing to pest control. It wasn't glamorous, but when plague came close, they were called upon. Now curl beneath your blanket. Think of the strange heroes who walked before the cat ever claimed the mouse. Even the quietest cities had someone keeping watch. Hey friends, listen for the tick, tick, tick. Before electric timekeeping, large tower clocks had to be wound by hand, sometimes daily. Enter the clock winder. Climbing spiral staircases, unlocking iron doors, and turning giant cranks, they brought life to bells and gears. Each town had one, sometimes more, and if they missed a day, the whole village rhythm shifted. They learned the sound of accuracy, the weight of time. Imagine adjusting a clock so large it echoed across rooftops. One misstep, and the chime would strike at midnight, at noon. But when it worked, pure harmony. So tonight, think of the hands behind the hands of time. Tick by tick, they kept our stories aligned. Dear listener, you're now inside a smoky bowling alley, 1920s America. Laughter echoes, balls roll, and pins scatter. But there are no machines yet, just a teenager behind the lane. He's the pin setter. Crouched in a wooden pit, dodging heavy balls, jumping up to reset pins in formation, over and over. Quick hands, quicker feet, quicker. They were called pin boys, paid by the hour, bruised by the night. They worked in rhythm, slide, crash, scatter, reset. Each strike felt like thunder, each spare a breath. Eventually, machines took over. But for a moment, every perfect game passed through a boy's tired hands. As you drift now, picture that simple pattern. Crash, set, repeat. And the quiet pride of keeping the game alive. You might be wondering who kept medieval beer drinkers safe. In Old English towns, the ale taster was a real official. Appointed by the community, they inspected batches of ale for flavor, strength, and safety. They tasted every brew before it could be sold. Imagine your job was to sip, sample, and declare aye or nay. They checked for spoiled grains, too much water, odd colors, and yes, they got tipsy, sometimes very, but it was serious work. Bad ale could mean sickness. Good ale meant prosperity. They wore special badges, walked from tavern to tavern, and sometimes judged competitions. So next time you enjoy a drink, raise a glass to history's original quality control. Someone once sipped, so you could smile. Hey friends, lean in close. You're in a damp stone room now. It smells of lime, wool, and earth. Before paper became common, parchment, animal skin, was the writing surface of choice, and someone had to make it. The parchment maker cleaned, stretched, scraped, and dried hides until they were smooth and thin. It took weeks. Each sheet was precious. Some bore scars, proof of life, not flaws. Others held golden ink and sacred prayers. They worked in silence, water dripping nearby, knives whispering across skin. Monks, kings, and merchants all relied on this strange art. Without it, no scrolls, no music, no law. Tonight, think of the hands that turned life into literature. Not all pages began with paper. You are in a sunlit village square. Children giggle, musicians play. And here comes the wedding crier. In parts of Eastern Europe and the Middle East, it was tradition to hire someone, usually a woman, to cry, wail, or sing laments before a wedding. She mourned the bride's departure from childhood, her family's loss, her new life. It sounds odd, but it was tender. These cries gave voice to unspoken emotions, grief wrapped in celebration. The crier, dressed in black, sang while combing the bride's hair, her words poetic and bittersweet. Not all tears are sad, some simply honor change. So as you fall asleep, think of the love held in ritual. Even joy has shadows worth singing for. Dear listener, the air is thick with incense. You are inside an Ottoman palace, and someone stands just outside the harem door. He's the dagger man, tasked with guarding the inner quarters, where the sultan's wives and concubines lived. Trusted, silent, often mute. He was usually a eunuch, trained in etiquette and swordplay. His weapon? A curved blade tucked beneath silken robes. But more than strength, he was expected to hold dignity, observe without judgment, speak only when spoken to. He lit lanterns, announced visitors, intercepted gossip, protected secrets. You might not notice him, but he noticed everything. Tonight, remember the quiet protectors, the ones history barely mentions but always relied on. Hey friends, dim the lights. Let's take a slow stroll through Renaissance Venice. Back then, mirrors were luxury, made from blown glass and polished metal, often worth more than gold, and mirror carriers transported them through narrow streets and canals. With padded arms and careful steps, they moved reflections from maker to palace. Rain was their enemy, so were jealous eyes. Some wore special uniforms, others hummed songs to steady their breath. Imagine balancing someone's vanity on your shoulders. They say bad luck comes from breaking a mirror. But for these couriers, it was more than luck. It was livelihood. Now close your eyes. Picture the shimmer of silver and the man who walked without blinking. Not all carriers bear burdens. Some carry beauty. You're standing on a frozen lake now. The silence is crisp. Then, crack! Before refrigerators, ice had to be harvested by hand. Ice cutters carved blocks from frozen rivers, hauled them into wagons, and stored them in ice houses for summer use. It was cold, dangerous, noble. They studied the ice, its thickness, its age, its temper. Horses pulled sledges. Men worked with saws and picks, dressed in layers of wool and hope. They brought coolness to cities, preserved food, made sorbet possible, and all from winter's breath. So tonight, under your warm blanket, thank the ones who kept summer sweet. Even frozen water has a history. Dear listener, our last stop tonight, a quiet street. A lantern swings on a pole. Footsteps echo. The night watchman once kept cities safe after dark. Long before police forces, he walked the streets calling the hour, checking doors and raising alarms. Midnight and all is well. He knew who belonged, who didn't, which windows glowed too late, which alleys murmured secrets. Some were old soldiers, others villagers seeking peace. They wore cloaks, carried staffs, and sang time like lullabies. Their job faded with streetlights and sirens, but for centuries they were the rhythm of rest. So now, as you drift off, imagine one more call in the night. All is well, and it truly is. Hey friends, close your eyes and imagine the rustle of silk, the flicker of candlelight, and the scent of violet powder in the air. In 18th century Europe, the powdered wig reigned supreme, but keeping those towering creations in style took help. Enter the powder puffer. These were assistants, usually women, tasked with applying fine powder to wigs, faces, and clothing. They used hollow tubes or bellows to puff clouds of starch and perfume onto hair. It was a messy business. Rooms turned white, lungs filled with lavender-scented dust. Still, it was considered art. The right powder finish said wealth, class, influence. Some puffers worked in palaces. Others roamed cities offering touch-ups on the go. Eventually, fashion changed. Wigs fell from grace. But for a time, looking flawless meant trusting the one behind the powder. Tonight, imagine a soft cloud settling over your dreams. Not all beauty arrives with a brush. Sometimes it floats. You are now inside a cool stone house, the 17th century, Scotland or northern England. A candle flickers beside a still body, and someone is adjusting the limbs. They are the corpse presser. Before refrigeration, keeping the dead presentable required care. The presser gently tied jaws closed, arranged hands over the chest, weighted eyes to stay shut, and sometimes sewed the lips if needed. It sounds macabre, but it was an act of grace. They worked in silence, using cloth, thread, sometimes wax. Their job was to preserve dignity for one final farewell. No one praised them, few remembered them, but every open casket moment owed them thanks. Tonight, rest with the thought that even in death, some hands worked softly to shape goodbye. A final kindness, made invisible. Dear listener, take a slow breath. You're in a cotton mill now, Derbyshire, 1770s. The world is changing. The Industrial Revolution is beginning. And the spinning frame, invented by Richard Arkwright, hums with motion. But it doesn't run itself. A child tends the threads. These were Arkwright spinners, young boys and girls who managed machines as tall as houses. They tied broken threads, cleaned gears, kept rhythm. It was loud, hot, relentless, but in exchange they earned coins, just enough to help feed the family. They worked by candlelight, learned by doing, and carried lint in their lungs. It was a hard job, but it built the modern world. So tonight, as your chest rises and falls in calm breath, think of the small hands that spun the fabric of industry. Some revolutions began with thread. You might be smiling already at the name, and yes, it's real. A gongoozler is someone who watches canal boats pass by. That's it. They stand, lean, or sit by the water and observe. The word comes from 19th century England. Canal workers coined it for idle onlookers, locals who stared at locks being operated or cargo being hauled. But eventually it became affectionate. Gongoozlers weren't lazy, they were curious, dreamy. Some took notes, others sketched. Children waved at barges. Old men timed the lock gates. They turned waiting into wonder. And even today, canal goers use the term, a quiet reminder that watching can be its own form of living. So tonight, let yourself be a little gongoozler. You don't always need to move. Just notice. Hey friends, imagine the smell of boiling leaves, a thick fog of earthy dye, and hands stained a deep blue. Before synthetic colors, ancient Britons used woad to dye fabric, a leafy plant, processed into a paste and boiled down into a rich indigo. The woad boiler oversaw this, tending vats, drying cakes of dye, crushing them into powder. It wasn't pleasant. The process stank of ammonia. Sometimes urine was used to aid fermentation. Yes, truly. But the color, unmistakable. Warrior blue, cloak blue, story blue. They boiled legends into cloth. Eventually, cheaper dyes replaced it. But for centuries, blue came from the patience of boilers and the strength of leaves. Tonight, let the color of sleep wash over you. Some shades are brewed with memory. You are walking through London, 18th century. It's night. Gas lamps don't yet exist, and the streets are thick with fog. Suddenly, a small boy approaches carrying a torch. He's a link boy, paid to light your way home. For a coin, he'll guide you from theater to tavern, or from carriage to door. His flickering torch your only safeguard. Link boys memorized alleyways, dodged thieves, and kept their flames alive in the rain. Some wore uniforms, others just rags. They were lanterns with legs. Eventually, street lighting replaced them, but their glow once turned chaos into calm. So tonight, imagine that dancing flame leading you safely through the dark. Every light once had a name. Dear listener, take a deep breath. Hear that distant shout? Before newspapers, radios, or tweets, news had legs and a loud voice. The town crier walked the streets ringing a bell, announcing royal decrees, lost dogs, market days, or punishments. They wore elaborate coats and tricorn hats. They were living bulletin boards. Hear ye, hear ye! People gathered at their sound. Gossip followed their footsteps. Children mimicked them in play. They were trusted, theatrical, and often drama students at heart. Their last cries faded in the 20th century, but in some towns they still return for festivals, reminders of when news meant a voice. So tonight, let your own thoughts ring softly. You carry stories too. Hey friends, picture this. High in the Pyrenees, a shepherd tends his flock, with needles in hand. In parts of France and Spain, shepherds were known to knit while watching over their sheep. Scarves, socks, even entire sweaters. It passed the time, used the wool nearby, and kept fingers nimble during long, lonely days. They sat on tall stilts to see over the terrain, one eye on the sheep, one hand on the yarn. Some became master knitters, creating patterns passed down generations. And when night came, they wrapped themselves in their own handiwork. Tonight, wrap yourself too, in quiet patience and threads of tradition. Even the gentlest jobs can be woven with art. You are now at the base of a stone kiln, somewhere rural. Smoke curls into the morning air. A quiet heat hums. The lime burner was a furnace master, heating limestone to make quicklime, used for building, tanning, and agriculture. It was slow, laborious, temperamental. They tended fires day and night, feeding them logs, watching for cracks, adjusting vents. If it went wrong, the stone could explode. Their skin bore soot, their hair smelled of ash. But when the kiln cooled, white gold, bags of powder that built cathedrals and cured soil. The burner was part alchemist, part caretaker. Tonight, imagine that steady warmth, a glow not of fire but of quiet purpose. Some transformations begin at 900 degrees. Dear listener, our final visit tonight. The tavern door swings open. A man enters. He is not there to drink, but to test. The ale conner was an official beer inspector in medieval England, appointed to ensure ale met quality standards and to prevent fraud. He smelled it, tasted it, sometimes sat in it. Yes, they poured a small sample on a wooden bench, then sat down in leather trousers. If their pants stuck, it meant too much sugar. Not approved. They were respected, sometimes feared. A bad rating could ruin a brewer, but they kept towns honest and drinkers happy. So next time you lift a glass, toast the ones who once judged by both taste and texture. Now rest. Tomorrow brings new stories to sip. Hey friends, dim the lights and listen closely. You're now inside a cigar factory in Havana, 19th century. The air smells of tobacco leaves and fresh ink. Rows of workers roll cigars in silence, but from a small platform a voice rises. That's the lector. His job? To read aloud novels, newspapers, political essays, to the workers as they shaped each cigar. It wasn't entertainment. It was enrichment, education, escape. Sometimes the workers pooled wages to hire the lector. Sometimes he was appointed by the factory. He read Dickens, Cervantes, news from Europe. His voice flavored the rhythm of hands and leaves. And in this strange mix of smoke and literature, revolutions began. Some workers even named cigars after their favorite characters. Tonight, let your thoughts roll slowly like tobacco, wrapped in the sound of a story. Even work can become a library if someone reads. You're in a pottery workshop now, Staffordshire, England, 1800s. Clay dust hangs in the air. Pottery must be fired in protective containers called saggers. And those saggers? They needed bottoms. Smooth, circular, firm. Enter the sagger maker's bottom knocker, a young apprentice whose job was to flatten the clay discs by hand and mallet. He sat on a low stool, knocked clay all day, knocked until it was even, knocked until his arms ached. It sounds silly, even a little funny, but it was vital. No bottom, no sagger, no pottery. He worked beside the sagger maker, quietly learning the trade. And though the name invites chuckles now, it once rang with the rhythm of a real, necessary craft. So tonight, if life feels repetitive, remember the bottom knockers. Even the strangest titles can carry steady purpose. Dear listener, you are walking down a dark alley in Victorian London. The lamps flicker, and the smell reminds you of why this job existed. The nightman collected what others left behind. Not garbage, but night soil, human waste stored in cesspits and privies. He worked under moonlight, with buckets, carts, and rags tied over his nose. It wasn't glamorous, but cities depended on him. He memorized who needed what, when, knocked softly, hauled silently, disappeared before morning, and while the world slept, he cleaned it. Eventually, sewers replaced him, but for centuries, cleanliness arrived, one quiet pail at a time. So sleep deeply, knowing someone once wandered just to keep dawn a little fresher. Some jobs vanish, but their absence is still felt. You are crouched beside a London gutter now, 1840s. The rain taps lightly, something clinks underfoot. You're a bone grubber, someone who scavenged bones from streets, markets, butcher stalls. Why? To sell them to soap makers, tanners, and glue factories. Bones were currency. They were cleaned, boiled, ground, reused. Bone grubbers knew where to look. Under tavern windows, beside butcher carts, behind schools. They carried sacks, wore aprons, sometimes worked with children. To you and me it might sound grim, but to them it was economy, recycling before it had a name. So tonight, as your fingers relax, think of those who sifted through refuse and found worth. Even what's tossed aside can be treasured. Hey friends, imagine you're walking through 18th century London wearing long skirts or polished boots. The streets are muddy, sticky, and full of surprises. Ahead stands a child with a broom. He's the crossing sweeper. For a penny, he'll clear a path through filth so you don't soil your shoes. He waits at intersections, watches carefully, sweeps quickly. Some wear little uniforms, others improvise. They rely on your generosity. They memorize faces, and they take pride in their clean little rectangles. It was the smallest form of service, but one that meant the world to those in silks and satin. Tonight, as your day clears and settles, remember the ones who swept paths for strangers. Clean footsteps start with humble gestures. You are near a market now, late 1800s. The air smells of meat pies and chimney smoke. You hear a whistle, not from a train, but from a man weaving through crowds. That's the pieman, a street vendor who sold hot pies from a tray slung round his neck. To draw customers, he whistled, each note signaling what kind of pie he had. Beef, 1 trill, eel, 2. Pork with herbs, a descending flutter. He warmed the pies on hot stones or braziers tucked under the tray, each puff of steam a savory promise. He didn't shout, he didn't beg, he sang with whistles. Tonight, let that melody play gently in your ear. Some flavors arrive with a tune. Dear listener, we travel now to ancient Persia, where the dead were not buried, but given to the sky. Zoroastrian vulture priests guided this ritual. Called sky burials, bodies were placed atop towers of silence to be consumed by birds. The priest oversaw the sacred space, prepared the body, chanted prayers, maintained the circle of purity. It wasn't macabre, it was reverent. Air, fire, and earth were too holy to touch the dead. So the birds became vessels of return. The vulture priest stood between death and transformation, neither feared nor adored, but deeply respected. Tonight, rest with the thought that every culture honors endings differently. Some with earth, some with wings. Hey friends, the sun is rising over a port city. Baskets rattle. The air smells of brine. Here comes the fishwife, loud, strong, proud. She sells fish in the market, fresh from the docks. She scales, guts, wraps, and shouts. Her voice, legendary. Her apron, always damp. In medieval and early modern Europe, fishwives had a reputation. Sharp-tongued, witty, fiercely independent. They negotiated prices with sailors, argued with bakers, ran households on salted cod and mussels. Some wore special hats. Others went barefoot, carrying fish on their heads. They were backbone and bustle. Tonight, let the sea's whisper carry you into dreams, and tip your imaginary coin to the woman who fed a city. You're inside a Japanese theater now, Edo period. Lanterns glow, fans flutter. Among the audience, a man walks with a small case. He's the tooth-black vendor. In Japan, blackened teeth once symbolized beauty and elegance. Women painted them with iron filings and vinegar. but sometimes it chipped or faded. The tooth blacker touched it up, applied the pigment, smoothed the sheen. It was cosmetic, ritual, identity. He carried tiny brushes, knew the shades, and worked in quiet corners. Eventually the trend faded, but for a time elegance had a color, deep, reflective black. Tonight think of beauty's shifting shapes. Sometimes it smiles back in the dark. Dear listener, it's dusk on a quiet green road. You hear honking, not from cars, but from a small army of waddling birds. The goose herder walks behind them, stick in hand, soft calls on his lips. In parts of England and France, geese were walked to market. Literally, miles on foot. Their feet were tarred for protection, their wings clipped to prevent flight. The herder knew every bird, named some, nudged the stubborn ones gently. At market they were sold for meat, feathers, or eggs, but until then they were travelers. Imagine watching that feathery parade pass your door. So tonight, let your thoughts waddle home in peace. Every journey deserves a gentle guide. Hey friends, if you love this series, don't forget to subscribe. There are 50 more strange and beautiful jobs ahead. Hey friends, imagine standing beside a black mountain that shifts with every breeze. You're in an old coal yard, early 1900s. The screener of coal had one task: separate the good chunks from the dust and rubble. Using a giant metal mesh, she'd toss shovelfuls of coal into the air. The pieces that didn't fall through the grid were kept. The rest, sold for less, or burned at home. Screeners were usually women, faces smudged with soot, aprons blackened with every hour. It was rhythmic work, rattle, shake, sort, all day long. They knew the weight of good coal by feel, knew how to keep warm even before the fire was lit. So tonight, let your breath rise like smoke, and rest easy, knowing someone once filtered fire from stone. You are walking past a row of dark linens now, drying on wooden frames. A deep indigo flutters in the breeze. In Victorian England, mourning had rules. After the death of a loved one, you wore black, then gray, then lavender. Each shade, a stage of grief. Someone had to dye those fabrics. The dyer of mourning cloth used soot, logwood, and iron to achieve rich, respectful blacks and soft ashen hues. He worked in silence. Some say the vats held more than dye, perhaps sorrow steeped in steam. He knew the chemistry of color and the psychology of loss. His work wrapped widows, clothed memory. Tonight, may you find peace in the quiet colors between goodbye and healing. Some feelings are worn. Dear listener, you're sitting in a quiet village church, 17th century England. The priest begins to speak. But there, under the pew, a scruffy dog starts barking. Enter the dog whipper. He carried a long stick, sometimes with a brass tip. His job? Escort unruly dogs out of church, sometimes with a gentle nudge, sometimes a chase. Dogs wandered freely then, into bakeries, fields, and yes, into churches. The whipper also prevented fights between dogs in the nave, or between their owners. He wore a badge, took his role seriously, and in some towns held a seat of honor near the back. Eventually the dogs stopped coming, but for a while worship came with barks and the shuffle of paws. So as you fall asleep, imagine that last quiet Sunday when no dog interrupted the sermon. Even peace had its guardians. Hey friends, dim the lights, and think of this strange twist of healing. In 19th century France, medical schools ran out of real leeches. Demand was too high. So surgeons created an unusual alternative, the artificial leech. This device mimicked a leech's bite. It used small blades to pierce skin and glass cups to suck blood, intended to treat imbalances. Someone had to make them, clean them, apply them. The artificial leech specialist carried kits, prepared patients, monitored the suction. It was part medicine, part theater, part precision clockwork. And though it's mostly forgotten now, it represented the intersection of fear, faith, and invention. Tonight, let your thoughts be gently drawn, not drained. Sometimes even science has a sense of drama. You are now stepping softly through 18th century Paris. The streets are narrow. Lamps flicker faintly above. And here comes a man with a lantern, not for himself, but for someone blind. It seems odd, doesn't it? Why carry light for someone who can't see? But the lantern wasn't for the blind person. It was for others. So people wouldn't bump into them. So carriage drivers could avoid them. So the path around them stayed visible. It was a job of courtesy, of awareness. Some carriers were relatives. Others were paid. But each carried a glow of gentle dignity. So tonight, remember that light isn't always for the bearer. Sometimes we shine, so others can walk safely. Hey friends, take a quiet walk down a foggy, gaslit street. The lamplighter was a familiar figure, but behind him, a smaller shadow, a boy. The lamplighter's boy carried oil cans, extra mantles, tools. He fetched ladders, cleaned the glass, refilled the wick boxes. He learned the sequence, memorized faulty lamps, practiced striking flints until his thumbs blistered. Sometimes he got to light a lamp himself, a glowing promotion. He wasn't paid much, but he glowed with pride. Eventually, the electric bulb ended both their jobs. Still, somewhere in old diaries and oil-stained aprons, the boy's memory lingers. So tonight, may your own small efforts spark something bright. Even the helper has his hour. Dear listener, the hearth is warm, but have you ever wondered who cleaned the chimney? In 18th and 19th century Britain, small boys, some as young as 6, were sent up chimneys to scrape soot from the inside. They were called climber boys. They crawled through dark flues, braced knees and elbows, and brushed walls clean. It was dangerous, unsettling, but for many poor families, it was survival. They were covered in soot, coughed in their sleep, but they sang songs and knew every twist of every chimney. Eventually, laws changed. Brushes replaced boys. Still, for a time, every clean fire crackled with their silent service. So rest now. May no child ever again climb through shadow for warmth. You're walking through a quiet village garden now, but someone is digging, oddly, under your compost pile. It's the saltpeter man. In the 17th century, saltpeter, used for making gunpowder, was extracted from decomposing matter. Manure heaps, old cellars, damp barns. These men had royal permission to dig anywhere, even private property. They scraped walls, stole dirt, sifted through rot. It annoyed villagers, but the king needed gunpowder, and saltpeter men delivered. They traveled in pairs, took samples, smelled for decay, and in their buckets, beneath the filth, lay the raw stuff of cannons and conquest. So tonight, think of this odd alchemy, compost to combat. Even war has humble roots. Hey friends, are you still awake? In Puritan New England, church was serious business, and so was staying awake during sermons. The sluggard waker patrolled pews with a long stick. If someone nodded off, he tapped them gently. Or, if they were a child, tickled them with a foxtail tied to the end. He was part usher, part disciplinarian, part jester. He wore special clothes, took pride in knowing who snoozed most. Sometimes he nudged a dozing elder and whispered a verse. Other times, he just coughed softly. His job was to keep minds alert and souls saved. Tonight, no one will tap you. Sleep freely. The sermon's done. Dear listener, one more story tonight, quiet and strange. In 17th century Scotland, a resurrection waiter was hired to guard fresh graves. Why? Because body snatchers or resurrectionists might dig them up for medical schools. So families paid someone to sit by the grave, day and night, for weeks. He built small shelters beside tombstones, read psalms, smoked pipes, kept watch over grief. Sometimes he fired warning shots. Other times he just sat quietly in the mist. It was a job of trust, of presence, of stillness. Eventually, iron cages called mort safes replaced him. But for a while, someone kept love from being stolen twice. Sleep now, for the watcher is still at his post. Hey friends, close your eyes and imagine the ring of a small staff tapping against cobblestones. In 18th and 19th century England, the parish beadle was the community's eyes, voice, and soft enforcer, a kind of local official, part town crier, part usher, part peacekeeper. He walked in ceremonial dress, carried a staff tipped with brass, announced births, oversaw the workhouse, removed troublemakers from church, delivered notices to the poor. He didn't wield power exactly, just presence. An eyebrow raised by the beadle could silence a whispering pew. He kept order where law was too heavy and kindness too rare. Charles Dickens made him famous, but in real life he was less villain, more weathered neighbor with a clipboard. So tonight, if your world feels a little unruly, remember there was once a man with a staff, a hat, and a steady step who held the balance. Sometimes a gentle hand keeps things whole. Dear listener, you're seated beside a long wooden table in Norway, centuries ago. Bottles line the shelves. The air smells of herbs and grain. Here comes the aquavit tester, a professional drink sniffer and taster, trusted to evaluate the purity and flavor of this beloved spirit. Aquavit was more than a drink. It was ritual, trade, tradition. The tester swirled the liquid, held it to the light, took a small sip, just enough to judge the spices, the strength, the clarity. He ensured no bad batch reached a guest's glass, and in a land of long winters, his approval brought celebration. It wasn't about intoxication, it was about standard, culture, warmth. So tonight, raise an invisible glass to the one who tasted first, quietly, precisely. Some jobs, like this story, go down smoothly. Hey friends, dim the lights. We're inside a grand banquet hall now. Candles flicker, plates shine. And yet, your eyes are drawn to the napkins. They've been folded into swans, crowns, and fans. Who did this? The napkin folder. In Renaissance Europe, elaborate folding was a courtly art. These artists studied under masters, practiced creases and curves. Some designs took hours. Napkin folding wasn't just decoration, it was coded language. A fish meant Friday. A rose hinted at royalty. A pyramid said, "This is a meal to remember." They worked quietly before every feast, left no signature, just shapes that disappeared the moment the bread was broken. So tonight, think of the humble fabric beneath your fork. Once it was sculpture by moonlight. You're in a dark room now, velvet draped over the windows. In the center, a metal disc shimmers faintly. Before glass mirrors, polished metal served as reflection. But keeping that surface perfect? A craft of obsession. The mirror polisher used powders of tin, lead, and pumice, rags of soft leather, hours of silent circular motion. Every fleck mattered. A single scratch ruined the illusion. They held their breath while inspecting, used candlelight to test for warps. Some believed the soul could be seen more clearly in metal than glass. They didn't make reflections. They summoned them. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to blur and soften, imagine a hand still moving in slow, silent circles. What might your reflection reveal if you had to earn it? Dear listener, take a slow breath. Smell the hint of cedar and lemon balm. Long before plastic picks and paper sleeves, toothpicks were handmade, tiny slivers of wood shaped with knives and polished with oils. In 17th century Portugal and Italy, it was an art. Toothpicks were carved from scented wood, boxed like jewelry, given as gifts. Toothpick makers selected branches with care, aged them, whittled them slowly while humming. Some were flat, others round, some engraved with initials. The upper classes kept theirs in gold cases, but even common folk valued a well-made pick. It was a sign of dignity, to finish a meal and clean your smile with something handmade. So tonight, let simplicity return. One small tool, one steady hand, one satisfied grin. Hey friends, picture a warm bakery at dawn. The scent of crust, steam, and flour swirls gently. In ancient Rome, every loaf of bread sold in the market needed an official stamp, pressed into the dough before baking. The bread stamp inspector enforced this. He walked the ovens, checked the markings, verified the weight. The stamp told you who baked it, when, that it had passed the grain quality rules. It was the earliest food regulation system, baked right in. The inspector carried a wax tablet, took notes, gave nods of approval, and occasionally confiscated a loaf for further investigation. So as you lay in bed, warmed like a fresh loaf from the oven, remember, quality once came with a press, not a barcode, and someone had to look closely. You are standing in a medieval court. A messenger hands over a scroll, sealed in wax, marked with the sign of a king. But who opens it? Not just anyone, the seal opener. This official had steady hands and sharp eyes. He recognized forgery, noticed tampering, preserved the wax seal after reading. He was trusted with secrets, entrusted with silence. Sometimes he used a small knife, sometimes warmed the wax to lift it clean. Never cracked, never clumsy. He didn't speak of the contents, just delivered them intact. So tonight, think of all the things unopened, all the messages waiting, and the careful hands that never lost their meaning. Dear listener, the sun is rising over a quiet estate in medieval France. The sky stirs with wings. You are the dovecote keeper. Nobles kept pigeons for meat, messages, and manure, and someone had to care for them. The keeper cleaned the cote, fed the birds, trained some to fly home from distant towns. They built nests from straw, whispered to chicks, counted eggs in silence. The birds knew their voice, returned at dusk to familiar coos. It wasn't just farming, it was gentle kinship with the sky. Tonight, may your thoughts drift like feathered messengers and return to where they're most understood. Hey friends, the shutters are drawn. A red mark is painted on the door. Inside, silence. During plague outbreaks, homes were sealed shut, and a quarantine watcher was stationed nearby. He made sure no one entered or left, brought food, listened through the wall, noted every cough. He wasn't a doctor. He was a witness, a quiet line between safety and sorrow. Some watchers were kind, some cruel, but all of them alone. He recorded the days, reported deaths, and waited. Eventually, the door was unsealed or never opened again. Tonight, remember those who waited outside, not with fear, but with duty. Even absence is a job. You are standing in a grand hallway. Gears click, pendulums swing. The air smells of varnish and brass. But none of this beauty just happens. The clock dresser visited wealthy homes to care for long case clocks. He polished wood, oiled joints, adjusted hands, tuned the tick. He dressed the clock for public life. Sometimes he sang to keep time. Other times he whispered apologies to the mechanisms. He left the room smelling sweeter than before, and time ticking more kindly. So tonight, let your heartbeat sync with that patient rhythm. Someone once made time feel like home. Hey friends, the night is still, and droplets echo in rhythm. Before gears and springs, time flowed, literally. In ancient Egypt, China, and the Islamic Golden Age, water clocks measured hours with steady drips. But someone had to watch the water. The clock tender filled vessels, cleaned spouts, adjusted weights as temperatures changed. If the flow slowed, time slipped. If it rushed, the hours ran too fast. He worked in temples, courts, and observatories. Sometimes wore robes, always listened closely. In the hush of night, his ears became the hourglass. So tonight, imagine time not ticking, but dripping softly into a bowl, and someone listening for each second's fall. Dear listener, you're now stepping through a damp, dewy French garden. Small fences surround leafy patches. Inside, snails, hundreds of them. The snail farmer raised them for escargot, delicacy to some, oddity to others. He fed them lettuce, bran, herbs, kept them in shaded pens, sprinkled water gently, waited weeks for them to fatten and cleanse. They had names like Petit Gris and Gros Blanc. Each moved slowly, but purposefully. It was patient work, silent, with slime trails glinting in the morning sun. And in the end, a feast born from slowness itself. So tonight, slow your pace. Even the smallest journeys nourish someone. Hey friends, the year is 1856. A ballroom swirls with music, perfume, and fabric. Women wear vast skirts supported by crinoline cages. But before the dance, someone made them perfect. The crinoline fluffer. She adjusted the wires, smoothed petticoats, replaced bent hoops, ensured the silhouette floated just right. She worked beneath the hem, crouched with pins and brushes, unseen but essential. Some say she was a secret keeper. Others, a fixer of fashion mishaps. She never danced, but she shaped the dance. So tonight, fluff your blankets and rest like royalty. Behind every elegance is someone on their knees, holding it up. You're in a print shop now, Wooden letters wait patiently. A press creaks nearby. But how is the ink applied? With an ink ball, a leather-covered pad filled with wool, used to dab and spread ink across type. And someone had to make them. The ink ball maker stitched leather into round skins, filled them with horsehair or rags, tied them tightly, seasoned them with oil. He understood pressure, bounce, texture. Printers prized good ink balls. They made the difference between blotches and brilliance. Tonight, imagine that soft thump, ink meeting page, story taking shape. Sometimes the magic starts in your palm. Dear listener, look to the hills. Before telegraphs, semaphores sent messages using pivoting arms mounted on towers. From hill to hill, arm positions spelled out words. And on each tower stood a semaphore operator. With telescopes and coded charts, they watched, turned levers, and sent news across the landscape in waves of wood and shadow. Weather mattered, so did eyesight. One mistake could muddle meaning across miles. Wars, prices, and royal births all flowed through their careful hands. At dusk, the arms folded down. Messages rested. So did the operator. Tonight, may your own signals find clear sky. Some messages don't need wires, just line of sight and trust. Hey friends, the hat shop is quiet now. A feather rests beside a steaming kettle. In 19th century Paris, feather curlers styled plumes for fashion. Ostrich, heron, egret. They curled them with knives, fingers, and breath. They softened them with steam, smoothed barbs with silk cloth, dipped them in dye or perfume. Feathers crowned hats, fans, and gowns. But first, they passed through quiet hands. Some curlers worked in silence, others hummed. Their curls mimicked ferns, waves, or fire. Eventually, fashion moved on, but for a time, each hat held a little flight. So tonight, dream in spirals and softness. What beauty have you shaped lately? You are now pacing down a quiet 18th century London street. Every door has a different knocker. Lions, fists, rings, cherubs. But are they loud enough? The door knocker tester visited new homes to ensure knockers worked properly. They struck them, timed the echo, adjusted fittings. They knew which designs were too soft, which rang sharply, which suited servants' ears best. Some even offered custom tones, a polite tap or an urgent clang. It seems funny now, but back then communication began at the door. So tonight, as you close your door and settle in, remember, even knocks have voices, and someone once made sure they spoke well. Dear listener, the air smells of brine and bark. You are near a Norse tannery. While others used cowhide, some Arctic and Nordic communities tanned fish skin. It made flexible, waterproof leather, perfect for boots, gloves, even bags. The fish skin tanner scraped scales, soaked the hide in willow bark, and stretched it to dry. No stink, just clean, resilient leather. It was tough, light, and surprisingly beautiful. The patterns of salmon or cod shimmered softly in the light. Fashion born from water. Tonight, think of all the things we overlook. Even a fish's skin can walk the earth again. Hey friends, you're in a wide wheat field. The breeze rustles gold. But instead of a wooden dummy, a young man stands in rags, arms outstretched. He's the human scarecrow. He claps, shouts, waves flags, walks the perimeter to keep birds away. He's paid in food or coins, sometimes works with a dog. At noon, he naps in the shade. At dusk, he walks again. His job seems simple, but it saves harvests. And sometimes he sings, to pass the time, or to fill the space between crow and sky. So tonight, spread your arms wide and rest. Even scarecrows need dreams. You are now in a candlelit monastery, 14th century Italy. A holy man enters ecstasy, levitating mid-prayer, and someone must help. This was the assistant to a levitating saint, tasked with guiding, guarding, and grounding them. He held the saint's robe, whispered comfort, made sure they didn't float into harm. Sometimes he wrote what they said while suspended. Other times, just waited in awe. The assistant's hands were calm, eyes lowered, faith steady. He didn't seek miracles, he steadied them. Tonight, may you hold space for the impossible. Some wonders need a gentle witness nearby. Hey friends, dim the lights. Let's step into an 18th century apothecary beside the River Thames. Before CPR, doctors believed a puff of warm tobacco smoke blown, well, into the rectum could revive someone pulled from cold water. Yes, really. Yes, and someone had to do it. The tobacco enema specialist carried bellows and a long ivory tube. They stood by the riverside ready to inflate life back into the drowned. It wasn't just eccentric, it was official. Even the Royal Humane Society endorsed it. Eventually, they realized oxygen through the lungs worked better, but for a while, smoke and hope shared a single pipe. Tonight, may your breath come gently, from within and without. Some cures were stranger than the ailment. Dear listener, the street is quiet. A cloth hangs on a door. Inside, sorrow sits heavy. The plague wailer was hired to announce a death in times of plague. She walked the streets, keening softly. Sometimes she sang. Sometimes she simply sobbed. Her voice told the neighbors, stay away. Grieve from afar. She wore black, carried no name, knew how to say goodbye without ever saying a word. She wasn't just a mourner. She was a warning wrapped in sorrow. And though her job vanished with vaccines, echoes of her lament remain in folk songs and funerals. Tonight, let silence hold what words cannot. Even sadness once had a soundtrack. Hey friends, you're standing in a stone tower high above a medieval square. The gears turn, bells wait, and beside them, a wooden man. This is the clock jack, a carved figure who struck the bell with a hammer at each hour. But behind the figure, a boy, or sometimes a small man. The clock jack's assistant crawled inside the sculpture, adjusted the arms, wound the gears, and timed the movements. He was the secret behind the show. Some jack figures danced, some bowed, some had wings, but all of them needed someone behind the curtain. Tonight, if you hear a distant chime, think of the hidden hands that made time theatrical. Not every puppet is hollow. You are now in an ancient Egyptian temple. Papyrus rustles. Incense burns. And beside the scribes of law and astronomy sits a dung scribe. His job? Record animal droppings. Not for humor, but for agriculture. He noted dung quality, quantity, origin, tracking herds and health through what was left behind. Farmers consulted him like an oracle. Is this dung too dry? Too pale? His scrolls were brown-stained and well-thumbed, and though others mocked him, his data fed an empire. So tonight, rest easy knowing that even waste becomes wisdom when observed kindly. It's all part of the cycle. Dear listener, a strange figure walks the parade. He has no head, just a face on his chest. This was the Blemmy impersonator, an entertainer dressed as a mythical creature from medieval bestiaries. People believed the Blemmy lived far away, in Africa or India, with mouths and eyes on their torsos. So in festivals, men donned costumes with hoods tucked inside tunics and painted faces on their chests. They grunted, danced, confused children. Some thought it was comedy, others a quiet mockery of colonial curiosity. So tonight, as masks fall and beds warm, remember, not all myths were monsters. Some just needed a second look. Hey friends, the fire is warm and velvet glows in the candlelight. In Tudor England, noblemen wore codpieces, elaborate fabric pouches over their groins, padded and proudly displayed. Someone had to polish them. The codpiece polisher worked backstage in palaces and theaters. They brushed velvet, polished metal tips, adjusted ribbons. Some codpieces were jeweled, some squeaked. It was a strange but trusted job. An assistant's assistant, a keeper of illusions. No one remembers their names, but their handiwork strutted down the halls of power. So tonight, smooth your sheets, tuck your blankets, and smile. Even vanity needs caretakers. You are now in a royal bedchamber. Tapestries sway, the fire pops, and the king sneezes. But he doesn't reach for a handkerchief. He turns to his nose blower. In some royal courts, particularly in medieval France, a servant was assigned solely to assist with the monarch's nasal needs. He carried silk cloths, followed the king during cold season, knew when to step forward, when to step back. It was a mark of intimacy, trust, a strange loyalty. He was sometimes promoted to closer roles, because who's more trusted than the one who holds your sneeze? Tonight, may your breath be clear and your tissues close. Even royalty gets the sniffles. Dear listener, you're in a foggy market beside the Thames. slippery things slither in baskets. And over the chatter, someone sings. The eel seller's singer was hired to attract buyers, not with prices but with verses. Silver from the river, wriggled fresh and fair. Come get your eels, no bones to spare. They sang in rhyme, in rhythm, in dialect. They pointed to buckets, twirled scarves. It was half sales, half street theater, and when eels were unpopular, they improvised songs about pies, rain, or royal gossip. Tonight, hum your own lullaby. Even slimy things once danced to melody. Hey friends, we're back in the powder rooms of 18th century salons. Flour, starch, and perfume fill the air. But wait, there's a birdcage in the corner. The canary belonged to the wig powderer, a living warning system. If the bird grew sluggish or dropped, it meant the powder, often laced with toxic lead, was becoming dangerous. They watched the bird closely while dusting wigs. If the canary chirped, all was well. If it didn't, the room was cleared. Eventually, they changed ingredients. But for a while, beauty's safety depended on feathers and breath. Tonight, may your air be light and your warnings gentle. Even the smallest lungs once kept a room alive. You are on a frozen lake in Finland. Stars shimmer overhead. A man kneels beside the surface, ear pressed to the ice. He's the ice whisperer. In fishing villages, some believed you could hear the migration of fish beneath the ice. The whisperer listened for creaks, bubbles, distant flows. He tapped gently, listened again. Sometimes he told stories while listening. Sometimes he simply nodded and pointed. His guesses weren't always right, but people trusted the way he tilted his head. So tonight, press your own ear to silence. What might you hear beneath the stillness? Hey friends, if you love this series, don't forget to subscribe. The final 10 jobs are waiting, just around the corner. Hey friends, the tide is low and the baskets are heavy. The oyster wife wasn't just a seller. She was a fixture of seaside towns and bustling cities. In 18th and 19th century England, she pushed carts through cobbled streets, singing out her wares. Oysters fresh for love or luck. She shucked with speed, balanced baskets on her head, knew which streets had the best tips. Oysters weren't luxury then. They were street food. And the oyster wife was the rhythm of that hunger. Some wore striped aprons. Others sang lullabies to children while weighing shellfish. Tonight, may your dreams be salt-sweet and singing. Some meals come with a melody. Dear listener, you're beside a grave now, newly filled, but tied to the coffin. A string, rising through the soil, ending in a small bell. In the 18th and 19th centuries, fear of premature burial ran deep, so inventors created safety coffins with bell systems. And someone had to sit and listen. The bell puller waited in the cemetery, often overnight, in a small hut, listening for any ring. Most nights were silent, some not. It was part watchman, part dreamer. He drank tea, watched stars, and never stopped listening. Tonight, may you rest knowing someone once kept watch, just in case. Every silence had a guardian. Hey friends, take a slow breath. Picture an old haberdashery, shelves stacked with buttons. The button stringer sorted and threaded buttons onto long cords, by size, color, or type, so shopkeepers and tailors could find them quickly. Wooden ones, shell ones, brass or bone. Each string held 10 or 20 or 50, clicked together like notes on a soft necklace. It was quiet work, often done by the blind or by elderly hands. Some say they whispered stories to the buttons as they threaded them. So tonight, think of the small things that hold everything together. Even closures need careful hands. Dear listener, you're standing behind a coal cart in early Victorian London. Ash falls like snow, but from the front, a voice rises. The dustman's poet walked ahead of the rubbish cart, reciting verses. He charmed residents into giving tips and warned them to move their bins. Bring out your dust, bring out your tin, or I'll come round and toss it in. He wore patched coats, tipped his hat, knew 100 rhymes by heart. He was a jester of junk, a bard of the bins, and for a penny or two, he left your doorstep cleaner and maybe happier. Tonight, may your thoughts rhyme with rest. Even garbage sings, if you listen well. Hey friends, dim the lights. We're in a Victorian dressing room. A soft brush strokes long hair. But the fallen strands, they aren't discarded, they're saved. Hair receivers, small porcelain jars, collected hair from brushes, and someone had to organize, repack, and redistribute them. Why? To stuff into hair pieces, pin cushions, and embroidery. The fillers shaped little nests of hair, dried them, labeled them. Sometimes women sent in hair from loved ones, secret tokens woven into combs or keepsakes. Strange, yes, but also deeply sentimental. Tonight, let your dreams gather gently, strand by strand. Even what's shed can be shaped into memory. Dear listener, the chandeliers are lit. Wax trickles down. At great feasts and royal balls, servants were stationed to collect dripping wax from candles, so it could be reused. They placed metal catchers or small trays, wiped wax before it hardened, recast it the next morning. It saved cost, kept dresses clean, maintained elegance. The candle drip collector moved silently through the shadows, preventing mess, preserving light. Tonight, as your own light dims, think of those who swept behind the glow. Some brightness depends on quiet salvage. Hey friends, take a deep breath. You're in an apothecary's basement. Rows of glass jars gleam. This is the leech library. In 18th century hospitals, leeches were cataloged and sorted, some for delicate patients, some for deep bloodletting. The leech librarian kept records. He tracked which leeches were on duty, which had fed, which needed rest. He separated them by region, cleaned their jars, read medical notes to them sometimes. It was quiet, precise, and a little slippery. So tonight, let your own system rest and restore. Even worms had a file cabinet. Dear listener, we are aboard a merchant ship. The sea rocks gently. The air smells of salt and smoke, and someone is trimming the lamps. Whale oil lamps needed care. Wicks trimmed, soot cleared, glass cleaned. A lamp trimmer walked the decks hourly. He adjusted flame height, topped oil, checked for wind drafts. It kept sailors safe, letters legible, charts visible. His light made navigation possible. His soot-stained fingers, steady and sure. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, picture him steady on the waves. Even in darkness, someone keeps the flame alive. Hey friends, settle in. Before photographs, people sat in profile as a silhouette artist snipped their shape from black paper, by hand in minutes. The silhouettist studied noses, foreheads, jawlines, cut without sketching. It was elegant, affordable, personal. Some worked at fairs, others in parlors. Each profile became a memory, flat, shadowy, yet full of presence. Tonight, may your own outline rest gently on the pillow. Even shadows tell stories. Dear listener, here we are. One last figure in the soft twilight of history. The dream interpreter sat in ancient courts, in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, listened as kings recited visions from sleep. He deciphered symbols, read omens in rivers and teeth, knew which dreams meant war and which foretold rain. He wasn't a priest, nor a prophet, just a listener of the subconscious. Some were charlatans, others eerily accurate, but always they honored the quiet voice inside. Tonight, as your own dreams begin to stir, ask yourself, what would a dream reader say about what's to come?